Back in the year 1995, the 22nd season of BBC show Doctor Who aired. However, it was announced that the show would be on an 18-month hiatus. When it returned, the total runtime was halved, the story arc of the season was lackluster, the producer wanted to quit, Bonnie Langford became the companion, Doctor in Distress happened, and Colin Baker was blamed for all of this. But what if none of that ever happened? What if Season 23 happened as planned? In this video, I will talk about what would have happened if Season 23 went according to plan. So, as I said before the opening titles, the Doctor Who production team had started making Season 23 of Doctor Who. However, Michael Grade got in the way, so that didn't happen as planned. The season would have comprised of 6 serials running across 13 45-minute episodes. It would have kept the Saturday tea time slot, like Season 22. But these stories were cancelled because of Michael Grade. As we all know now, The Trial of the Time Lord was the serial story arc that took over Season 23 with 4 segments, let's say. It reflected how the show was on trial at that point. However, let's dive into an alternate timeline where Season 23 actually happened as planned. We do actually know the stories that were commissioned, and it's not a Season 27 situation where we know most of them. No, we know all of them, which ones are going to be commissioned. We even know their production code. They were that far into producing the next season before the hiatus happened. We also know who was going to write them and who was going to direct them. Now, Colin Baker would have obviously returned as the Doctor, and Nicola Bryant would have obviously returned as Perry. Now, the producer would have still been John Nathan Turner, and the script editor would still have been Eric Saywood. This serial would be 2 parts long, opening the season. It would have continued right off from Revelation of the Daleks, as the final line said by the Doctor in that story was going to be, "Alright, I'll take you to Blackpool." But he was cut off before he could say Blackpool, as the hiatus was going to happen. Former Doctor Who producer Graham Williams would have penned this, and this is an interesting case because, well, you don't usually see producers write scripts, do you? Well, nowadays, the showrunner, who is an executive producer, also writes the majority of the scripts. But back in the day, you didn't really see John Nathan Turner produce scripts. You didn't see Graham Williams produce scripts. But that doesn't mean to say Graham Williams hasn't actually written any Doctor Who prior to this. He co-wrote 2 scripts: The Invasion of Time, which he co-wrote with Anthony Reid, and City of Death, which he co-wrote with Douglas Adams, which was based on a story by David Fisher. In both stories, the pseudonym David Agnew was used. I don't know what I would have felt watching the story in terms of the quality of it. As of recording this video, I have not experienced The Nightmare Fair in any capacity. I've not read the Target novelization, I've not listened to the Big Finish adaptation. Now, I love City of Death. It's probably my favourite Tom Baker story. In fact, it is my favourite Tom Baker story. But The Invasion of Time could easily be considered my least favourite. Now, this may be to do with the script editors, as Douglas Adams also wrote The Pirate Planet, which is good, and Shada, which is probably also one of my favourite Tom Baker stories. And with Anthony Reid, he wrote The Horns of Nimon, so I think we can guess who the people to blame for the respective qualities are. I believe the story is generally considered really good. The novelization was, well, novelized by Graham Williams himself, and the audio adaptation was adapted by John Ainsworth. Now, this story would have been directed by Matthew Robinson. He previously directed Resurrection of the Daleks and Attack of the Cybermen, both stories which I feel like, in terms of direction, are pretty good. This story would have also seen the return of Michael Gough, playing the Celestial Toymaker. He'd reprised a role that he last played in the Season 3 serial, The Celestial Toymaker. However, a few years prior, he played a Time Lord character in Arc of Infinity. Now, the reason J&T had this idea for the story was because in Blackpool, Colin Baker opened a ride. He was dressed up as the Doctor opening that ride. J&T thought, why not have the Celestial Toymaker dabble around in that ride and, you know, do stuff. You know, you can't make this stuff up. You know? Now, the story would have also contained a scene where Perry would get attacked by robots, essentially. As well as a scene where the Doctor would have to play a video game to decide the fate of the world. I would want to watch that, actually. And once the day is saved, the Doctor and Perry would enjoy their holiday in Blackpool. Now, this serial's another two-parter. It would have been written by Wally K. Daly. He would have been a newcomer to the show, which JNT was a fan of getting newcomers, as, you know, he just wanted fresh talent. Some of Daly's previous television work includes There Comes a Time and Juliet Bravo. The director would have been Fiona Cumming. Her previous Doctor Who work was directing Castrovalva, Snake Dance, Enlightenment, and Planet of Fire. It would have been set on a planet called Tranquilla, where this character called the Dwarf Mordant has this evil space ray and fires it at the population, turning them evil. And these evil people were civilians turned into raging killers by the evil ray, and they would have attacked Perry, and the Doctor would have actually been one of the Eviltons. So, yeah. Now, here's the thing. At the end, right, the Doctor would have made the Dwarf Mordant use a good ray to stop everyone from being evil. I bet this could have been good, but it sounds utterly stupid. Now, this story would have been adapted into the Target novelization by Daly himself. No Big Finish adaptation has been made. This was going to be written much later in the writing process, and not much was done on it before the hiatus was announced. But we do know a few things about it. We do know it's a three-part story, so like the two Doctors before it. Also like the two Doctors before it, it would have been written by Robert Holmes. Now, of them writing the two Doctors, in the previous few years, he had also written The Caves of Androzani. Also like The Caves of Androzani, this would have been directed by Graham Harper, who also directed Revelation of the Daleks the previous season. This story would have featured either the Master or the Rani. We do not know. It could have been both. Might have been both. Some say the Master would have been more likely, as the Autons would have also returned and it would have been a reuniting of them. But he could have been replaced by the Rani later on, as I believe another story would feature the Master, and unless Anthony Ainley agreed to be in both of them, yeah, I do not think the Master would have been in two stories this season. Although, he could have been, I could be wrong. So yeah, the Autons would have also returned, and it was about 15 years since they previously appeared in the show. Their last appearance was in the Season 8 serial, Terror of the Autons, which was also the Master's first appearance. That is why people are thinking, oh, it could be the Master. The story would have also featured Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. Basically, he was on holiday in Singapore, and he ran into all of this. The guy can't get a break! It's a shame that the story was never made because, you know, Sixth Doctor never met the Brigadier on television. It's also a shame because the combination of Holmes and Harper would have made this story possibly up there with the Caves of Androzani, you know? However, I feel like the story would have a Towns of Weng-Chiangi type vibe, it was also written by Robert Holmes, that's why I'm mentioning it, but probably set in modern day, and hopefully less racist. Now, this would have been Robert Holmes' last story, if things went to plan, as, well, he died in 1986. That means his last full story now is The Mysterious Planet, and he could only complete the first part of The Ultimate Foe. And because the story was so late in the writing process at that point, Terrance Dicks couldn't novelise it. Now, this was a two-parter, and it was going to be written by Philip Martin, who wrote Vengeance on Varos. It's my favourite Colin Baker story on television, and it's the best in season 22. So, there you go. This probably would have been good. It would have been directed by Ron Jones, who also directed Vengeance on Varos. Jones also directed a few others in the GNT era, but who cares about that? He directed Vengeance on Varos. Now, the story would have been about the planet Magnus. It's cooling at an alarming rate, which it's explained through gravitational tilt. Philip Martin actually got this idea when speaking to academics at his wife's university, the university that his wife works at, not university. You know. Now, Syl from Vengeance on Varos returns, but it's not because Philip Martin really wanted to put Syl in. It's because the actor that played Syl, Nabil Shaban, wanted to be in Doctor Who again because he really enjoyed it. Yeah, he's correct. He should have been in Doctor Who again. Because Syl is just a great character to watch and presumably to play. Syl did eventually get into season 23, our universe's season 23, as he was in Mind Warp, which was also written by Philip Martin. However, this is the third story to feature a returning villain that hadn't appeared in a while, as the story features the Ice Warriors, which their last appearance was in season 11's serial, The Monster of Peladon. They would have been working for Syl and have been responsible for this tilting of the axis, as they want to inhabit Magnus themselves. They would, however, betray Syl, but the Doctor would use the Ice Warrior technology against them. This story would eventually be novelised by Philip Martin himself and be adapted into a Big Finish audio by Philip Martin himself. Now this story, again, would be a two-parter. This would have been written by former Doctor Who script editor Christopher H. Bidmead. He was script editor during season 18. Yeah, it was his job to make everything boring. Yeah, and he wrote 3 scripts for Doctor Who: Castrovalva, Logopolis, and Frontios. He probably had a fetish for naming things one-word titles that weren't actually words.
Update. Yes, I'm on holiday when I'm editing this. I have actually now seen Frontios, and it's good. I like it. That's all I need to say.
But the first 2 aren't that great. It would have also been directed by Matthew Robinson, who I already spoke about, so this would have been his second story of the season. The story would actually be a sequel to Frontios, as it features the Tractators. The story also features a character called Professor Stream, which, if you don't already get it, he's the Master! Because the Stream is an anagram of Master. 80s people were clever, weren't they? However, in the audio adaptation of it, he's not the Master. However, he's still intended to be the Master, mainly because he's still called Professor Stream, and he's portrayed by a guy who sounds like Anthony Ainley. The Master would later appear in the Ultimate Foe section of The Trial of the Time Lord. As I have mentioned, The Hollows of Time was adapted into a Big Finish audio by John Ainsworth. Okay, so less is known about this one than Yellow Fever and How to Cure It. Which I'm surprised, because this one actually had its actual first draft. Now, Michael Feeney Callan would have written this, and he had this to say about it on his website. I wrote a 2-parter called The Children of January. It was to be a season closer, not a series termination, but the BBC decided in mid-season that the show had run its course, in the middle 80s. I think they were right. But I loved my episode, which was discovered late in 1985. I created a race of runaway proto-humans called the Zeros, sort of human bees, of which I still have the fondest nightmares. The Children of January incidentally refers to the renegade outcasts of a dawning parallel universe civilization that was abandoned. Holy that sounds good. Callan had never written for Doctor Who before, but his IMDb page says that he had script edited 3 episodes of the show Shoestring, and he also wrote episodes for the Burke Enigma. Bob Gabriel would have directed. I'm not sure if he's called Bob Gabriel or Robert Gabriel. He had previously directed EastEnders. This serial was never adapted. I'm not sure why, as I had a completed script and it sounded good. I'm sure Big Finish would do a good job of this if they did adapt it. Turns out they were going to, but then they decided to do the macros instead. But I don't see why they couldn't have just done this one. Overall, I'm actually pretty sad that the season was never made. Most of the stories actually sound really good, even though some of the writers I'm a bit iffy on. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever that may be. Goodbye.